Well, what businesses need is they need consistency, and they need to really have confidence in the regulatory environment that they're working in.
So we need to have very clear, certain regulations in order to operate and get permits and be able to produce here in Colorado. If we don't have that regulatory certainty, just like any other industry, that certainty can really drive location decisions. It can really drive capital investment decisions here in the state. And so if we don't have the regulatory certainty that we need, we can miss out on some of those things and be less competitive as a state as it relates to our industry.
But what you want running a business is some stability. You know what the playing field's all about. You can make your hiring and your investment decisions based upon that. It's a stability system, not just tax and regulatory, but simple rule of law that again helped enable the start of the Industrial Revolution, first in the United Kingdom and then in the United States and ultimately around the world. But a stable and thoughtful tax and regulatory environment are essential to that.
From an income tax standpoint, obviously individuals and businesses care deeply about the taxes they pay, and so that's important. I think from a business standpoint, we also care deeply about the regulatory environment in which we operate in Colorado and what that is like. Is it pro-business or not pro-business, and is there more of it or less of it? And so I think that's really important. And then lastly, obviously as business leaders and owners, the total cost that it takes to operate a business in a particular place is important.
But it's critical to our state to have something that's fair for business and not overload businesses with unfair regulation. It's also important to provide affordable housing for people that want to work and live in this state. And one thing that we lack in Colorado is enough affordable housing. We've quickly become one of the highest cost of living states for inland states within the United States.
Colorado, historically, especially coming out of the last Great Recession, was a top economy in the nation. We've been ranked in the top. Best state for job growth. We've had industry growth across the board. However, in the last several years, that's been threatened. We see an onslaught of new taxes and fees. Headed into 2023, we're going to have over $1.5 billion in new taxes and fees that business, especially small business, is going to have to grapple with and address.
Very excited to be a part of an organization that helps advance the voice of business and really helps to illustrate the value proposition that businesses bring to our customers, our communities, and the people that we serve in the state.
Appreciate you all being here this afternoon. I'm Debbie Brown, president of the Colorado Business Roundtable. And we're joining the kickoff today of our Policy Roundtable series for 2023. And this one falls underneath our pillar where we talk about tax and regulatory issues. So the video teaser that you saw is part of a video campaign we're going to do this year, similar to the Business Roundtable nationally, on these 4 pillars. So you'll see more about those kinds of videos going forward, and where we really want to amplify the voice of business here in Colorado. We're the state affiliate of the National Business Roundtable based in Washington, D.C., which you might be familiar with. Business Roundtable employers provide 37 million American jobs, 24% of the US GDP, and $1.4 trillion in taxes annually at the federal, state, and local level. As a state affiliate, we also work largely with large employers, but a little bit different than most of the other roundtables. Most of our executives come from what we call the ABCG, which is academia, business, community, and government. Because we feel like those 4 sectors, not all industry, those 4 sectors make for the best collaboration. Within that, we work on policy pillars that help add and grow Colorado's economic competitiveness. You heard a little bit about the tax and regulatory structure, which is what we're here to talk about today. Beyond that, we work on issues around workforce, infrastructure, and also community issues that affect us and affect the business community. So our belief when we're talking about the tax and regulatory pillar is that sustainable economic growth can be maximized when we achieve a business-friendly regulatory balance and support consistent fiscal policies that incentivize innovation, job attraction, and retention. So the impact on business, knowing that we compete with other states, we compete globally, And all those competitive factors help a business decide whether to grow here, whether to stay here, or whether to ultimately, decide to go somewhere else. We're in a competitive landscape. One of the things we put out today is a 2023 rankings book developed by one of our allies, the Common Sense Institute, which puts together rankings of each state based on different economic predictors. And Colorado has some wins, we have some challenges. And I'd encourage you to pick up a copy of that book. We were a prime sponsor of that this year. When we talk about the pillar of tax and regulatory, issues come up around economic growth, tax policy, smart regulation. You heard some in the video today about predictability and overall cost of doing business. In light of today's topic, I just want to add, one of the things we're also really focused on is community. And we know that profits and purpose go hand in hand. Employers provide jobs, they provide opportunity. There's a concept of dignity of work that we talk about quite a bit when we think about workforce issues. And companies also provide philanthropic giving, support in the community to meet some of our most pressing challenges. Overall, our mission, we're aligned under that business is a force for good. Opportunity is good, jobs are good, and we want to make sure Colorado stays competitive. Dan Caruso, if you were at our event at the View from the Top this fall, I think said it so well, the founder of Zayo, only profitable companies can be purposeful. So to kick us off for today, ESG is top of mind for a lot of our partners. It's a big topic around the country, of course, that we wanted to bring some thoughtful conversation about today. When I was talking to some of the folks who helped put this together, I sort of see it as an ink blot test to some degree for business and for politics. One viewpoint, of course, is that companies are strategically showcasing their commitment to ESG, creating new systems to track and report their progress, and it's viewed as a more modern way to forecast performance. And of course, the concept of doing well is doing good. Another viewpoint, we can look to the governor, Florida's governor, of course, DeSantis, who has a different viewpoint, is in the news quite a bit about some of his comments about ESG being a Ponzi scheme or a place to have political strategy. We'll probably see more talk about ESG with a divided Congress. I think there's rumors that there might be some federal conversation as well regarding the topic. So today we brought together thought leaders that we're hoping will have a frank, fair, maybe it'll be a little feisty conversation about ESG and really unpack key questions, key considerations, and help us look at maybe some misconceptions around ESG, but also what the future holds for business leaders grappling with predictability and what's to come. So I'm really thankful that Michael and David took the time to come in to Colorado for this event. I will say this is typical Colorado weather. It's crazy one day. Don't let it alarm you because today was beautiful. And thanks to Chris, too, who's one of our favorite Colorado CEOs headquartered here. So it's going to be a really thoughtful conversation today. Before we introduce our speakers and jump to it, I want to give a couple minutes to the folks who helped make today possible in terms of our event sponsors. And want to bring up Brownstein first for a couple comments. As they're coming up, I'll go ahead and introduce you to. Carrie Johnson is a shareholder in Brownstein's Denver office, whose practice focuses on litigation related to complex contract, corporate governance, fiduciary duty, fraud, and securities issues. In particular, she has extensive expertise in managing both internal and external crises for businesses and their owners, using her business acumen and proven instincts to create and execute multifaceted strategies. As co-chair of the ESG group, Carrie counsels clients on how to mitigate and address emerging risks. Joining Carrie is Jason Downs, a shareholder in Brownstein's DC office, a former Chief Deputy Attorney General for the DC Office of the Attorney General. He is a respected civil and criminal litigator. As co-chair of both the State Attorneys General Practice Group and ESG Group, he serves as lead counsel for clients facing enforceable action, takes a creative approach to educating the state AG community on behalf of clients, and helps businesses understand the authority of state attorneys general. Jason provides strategic advice on parallel civil and criminal investigations, as well as civil rights audits. His work includes helping Fortune 500 companies mitigate risk and improve equity in hiring and managing employees and impact on consumers and the community. So please give a warm welcome to Brownstein. We're happy they sponsored today's event.
All All right, well, thanks so much for having us, and really thank you to the Colorado Business Roundtable for organizing such a timely discussion right now. ESG is such an important topic, as was mentioned earlier. I co-chair the State Attorney General Practice Group, and I co-chair our ESG practice group alongside Carrie Johnson and Rebecca Tucker. And as many people in this room know, ESG really is one of the more politically divisive topics, especially in the state AG community. Last week, that was on full display. There were two conferences, one led by the Republican Attorney General Association, RAGA. The other was led by DAGA, the Democratic Association Attorneys General, excuse me. And they were polar opposites. So to give you an example of that, I'll give you one example at the outset. There were discussions at RAGA surrounding the motivations of ESG, and specifically there was a comment, I want to make sure I get it right. It was activists are trying to push social agendas in the boardroom, and these activists are trying to shut down free speech rights of the business community. That is what you're hearing in the Republican room when we're talking about the motivations surrounding ESG. Compare that to what we're hearing at DAGA. There was similar discussion at DAGA, and one of the quotes that I wrote down was, quote, "Major businesses have been behind many social initiatives, but they had financial reasons for doing so. It paid off for society and it paid off financially for the company." So the point is, the messaging from Democrats and Republicans, polar opposite, and we're expecting that to continue. And if you look at specifically the financial services industry, you can look at what one of my friends, the Attorney General of Tennessee, said recently about ESG. He said, quote, "ESG is a financial smokescreen. It distracts from maximum returns. It gets you into the cool kids club," end quote. Compare that to what we're seeing from the Democrats on the financial services side, and they have said that ESG is a financially responsible way of mitigating risk and for ensuring that Americans' retirement accounts are protected. So depending on who you listen to, depending on what research you listen to, the ESG community and the Democrats and the Republicans are deeply divided, especially at the state level. But we are expecting the same at the federal level as well. One of our colleagues at Brownstein just joined us from Speaker McCarthy's office. He was the chief of staff there, and we are expecting to see more congressional oversight, more congressional investigations into private industry's ESG practices. And last but not least, I should also mention, in addition to state AGs, in addition to Congress, we are also expecting to see external pressures asking for more internal reviews surrounding the S in ESG. For example, whether emerging technology is discriminating against or disproportionately impacting protected classes. We're expecting to see more internal reviews surrounding gender discrimination, sexual assaults, pay equity audits, and of course, we are expecting to see this coming from shareholders as well, and also on the private side. So we're, at Brownstein, we're expecting to see more increased scrutiny from the state AG community, increased scrutiny from Congress, and external pressure as well. So we're thankful for the Colorado Business Roundtable for organizing this discussion, and I'll pass it over to Carrie for anything that we should also add. Thanks, Carrie.
Sure, and I'll just briefly add a couple of points from the perspective of the litigator in the room. And I will say, I think, lucky for all of you, lawyers will not be the ones speaking on the rest of this topic, but it certainly frames, just to help sort of frame the conversation and the way that we think about these issues at Brownstein, because we deal with them every day, is, truthfully, whether you label them as ESG or not, these are concepts that largely have been around forever. Right now, it's a hot button issue, and it's, there's more prominence, there's more focus on it. It might be of a heightened sort of temperature level, but we've been looking at these issues forever. And just from the perspective of a litigator who does a lot of corporate governance work, a lot of fiduciary duty work, one example, and we've got an article that you folks were gracious enough to let us put in the back that we recently published about a new decision that just came out from the Delaware Court of Chancery. And if you follow anything in the legal community, business community, you know that Delaware is often the bellwether for trends to come in the legal, in the legal field. And this recent decision expanded for the first time ever the duty of oversight, which has been one of the fiduciary duties that's long been applied to corporate directors. It applied for the first time in a limited context, but still applied it to corporate officers. We don't know what the long-term impacts of that will be, but whether or not you frame that as an ESG issue under the G of governance or not, it is. And this is the type of thing that just I think has to frame the way that anyone in this room, even if you're lucky enough to not be a lawyer dealing with litigation like this all the time, it still frames the discussion and still frames sort of where the business community may be headed in some of their considerations. So on that note, we'll turn it over and just say again, thank you so much for the time, and thanks for inviting us to sponsor this event.
Thank you very much. We're grateful to have one other sponsor for the event, but before I introduce Richard, I wanted to say, I think that's one reason why this conversation in Colorado is so robust, is we can actually have a conversation. There is a lot of divisiveness about the issue, but I think we're conveners and collaborators by nature here in Colorado and want to understand the issue more, but appreciate that. And it sounds like hire Brownstein if you have issues to go forward. They'll be here all night. Next, I want to introduce Richard Goring with CAP Logistics. CAP is also a sponsor of today's event. CAP Logistics is the uptime logistics provider for oil and gas, mining, heavy equipment, power generation, manufacturing, and others in the heavy industry vertical, which are often located in remote areas in the US, Canada, and Mexico. CAP's target market understands the value of uptime and reliability, understands the cost of downtime, and are looking to delegate their transportation needs. CAP is open 24/7, 365, which sounds exhausting, Richard, with live uptime logistics experts to help you in your time of need. Richard Goring is the Chief Operating Officer for CAP, integrating sales, operations, and accounting. Richard is also spearheading CAP's ESG program, so we'll hear from an actual company working on this today. So welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Debbie. We're very happy to be here and to be a sponsor. Gail Denninger, our CEO. Gail, I know you're out there. Raise your hand. If you don't know Gail, Gail's got a big heart, and he's had one for the 41 years that we've been operating here in Denver, Houston, and Salt Lake. And it's really funny, we talked about ESG with some of our bigger customers. I was just up in Calgary 2 weeks ago. And the discussion was really around how can we work together as a customer-vendor relationship and what we can do for the community and for the environment. And I'm pretty excited. Gail has always gone by the mantra of it's good business to be a good neighbor. And we live that every single day at CAP Logistics, not only for the environmental, but also for the community. From philanthropic donations of coats to our friends in Poland, and or mathematical books to some friends in South Africa. We've been doing that for the last 41 years. But that's not why I'm here. I want to talk to you about what we've done to formalize our ESG program and a really nice big booster that we're getting this year. So, our customers have been coming to us saying, what are you doing for ESG? And we talked to them about what we've done for the community, what we've done for the environment, but we really formalized it in 2022 and really found out and pulled in as much knowledge as we can from the scientists and all that good stuff. And we said, okay, now we know where we're at. We're measuring where we're at. Where are we going to go in the future? And I'm super proud to say that as of 2023, our Denver campus, all 3 buildings, will be powered by renewable energy. But that's not the big idea. Anybody can put solar on a roof, right? The big idea is we're not just putting 100% of our energy usage on the roof, we're putting 200%. And the premise there is to take that extra amount, those credits from our good friends at Excel, and being able to donate those back to nonprofit and low-income housing in our Denver community. So we're very happy and excited to get that up and running this year, and we hope that other private and public companies take a gander of that small little bit of extra solar power or renewable energy and what we can do with those extra credits. And I'm super happy to see the panel get up here and start debating about that. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeff Bloomquist, Managing Director at JP Morgan and our Corporate Client Banking Group here in Denver. And I have the honor of introducing our speakers tonight. I'm also on the board of Colbert, and I'm the head of the tax and policy pillar that Debbie mentioned earlier. As outlined in the marketing materials for this event, the topic of ESG has recently become greatly divided amongst the business community. According to Morningstar, at the end of 2022, there were more than $2.5 trillion invested in ESG funds. And according to a 2020 survey provided by compliance software company Navix Global, 88% of public companies and nearly 2/3 of private companies had ESG initiatives in place. However, on the flip side, 10 states have adopted anti-ESG regulations in the form of state laws, investment resolutions, or Attorney General, State Treasurer opinions, with other states presently debating similar legislation. All of this provides an interesting topic for our great panel today. So let me introduce our speakers. David Bohigian is the managing partner of Pluribus Impact Capital, a venture capital and private equity fund of funds seeking superior returns and extraordinary impact across multiple sectors. Bohigian has extensive experience in investment, management, and international development. He has led and advised innovative financial services firms, most recently leading the Overseas Private Investment Corporation's transformation to the Development Finance Corporation, a U.S. government agency established with bipartisan legislation he helped pass. OPIC has invested over $100 billion across more than 100 countries. Previously, David worked on the core management team of the world's largest hedge fund, developed the machine learning themes for a leading global investment bank, and pioneered new business models as a venture capitalist. In the Bush administration, David was the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for International Trade. Michael Lane is head of iShares U.S. Wealth Advisory and a member of the U.S. Wealth Advisory and U.S. iShares Executive Committees. Working with financial advisors for nearly 3 decades, Michael oversees the development of advisor-centric solutions, due diligence, and implementation of iShares, helping advisors build better portfolios with core, fixed income, factor, and model-based ETFs. Prior to joining iShares at BlackRock in 2018, Michael served as the global head of strategic retirement initiatives at Dimensional Fund Advisors, responsible for the strategic development and global distribution of the retirement solutions for one of the world's premier asset managers. Self-described tech nerd entrepreneur, I love that introduction. Chris Wright serves as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board of Liberty Energy. Chris is a dedicated humanitarian with a passion for bringing the benefits of energy to every community in the world. This passion has inspired a career in energy working not only in oil and gas, but also fusion, solar, and geothermal. Chris embraces all sources of energy if they are abundant, affordable, and reliable. Chris has become a bold advocate bringing rational thought to the energy dialogue. He has spoken on energy and the merits of the shale revolution to the UK House of Lords and state and federal lawmakers with multiple appearances on network TV, documentaries, and podcasts. With that, welcome our speakers.
Thank you for that nice introduction, and thank you all for being here today. Thank the speakers and Cobert and the sponsors, and I'm really excited for the next hour to learn something here. And when it comes to what's next for ESG, I think it's important to go back before we go forward and think about the amazing transition that we're in right now. This nation started as a nation of shopkeepers and farmers in a regional agrarian economy. And it made a major transformation in the 1860s through to the early 20th century that included civil war, more pandemics and panics that we can imagine, and it transitioned out of that into a national manufacturing economy. Think about it, there was no such thing as a business roundtable in 1776, right? But the power of businesses shifted, and I think what ESG is a continuation of is what's the proper role of government and what's the proper role of business in society. Think about on the eve of our Civil War, we were connecting the world's first transcontinental telegraph. Didn't exist. Colorado didn't exist, right? It was a matter of a Pony Express getting mail from my home state of Missouri out to California in a remarkable 20 days. And there's a famous lithograph of the Pony Express rider going down the trail, literally looking over his shoulder at the telegraph going in. And I wonder what he's thinking about at that point. I think he's thinking, I'm gonna lose my job, right? But I also would like to think that his son became a telegraph operator and his great-great-granddaughter is working on AI today, because that's the kind of innovation and progress we need to continue to promote to be successful. And I think as we transition from a national manufacturing economy to an information economy that's international in scope, we're setting new standards, and that's what ESG is, and that's why it's divisive. Right? Again, it was a divisive time going from one system of economics and governance to another with civil wars, and we didn't have several institutions that we have today. We're going to talk about the SEC later, right? That's less than 100 years old, right? We're going to talk about how attorneys generals and treasurers are shaping the debate throughout 50 states that didn't exist. So I think it's important to think about the role of companies that just didn't exist 150 years ago, and now they're being asked to take on governance, social, and environmental issues in a way that really hasn't been seen before. Because some critics of ESG will say corporations shouldn't do any of that. They weren't elected to do that. That's what democracies are for. Right? Others say corporations live in a stakeholder environment, and that's where you need to be. And the Business Roundtable had a major pivot point on that just a few years ago when they went from a shareholder value approach to more of a stakeholder value approach. And so you start to think about today, what's the purpose of ESG, right? Some will say, well, it's really just a time horizon thing. And public companies who are focused on quarterly earnings can't focus on the long term. Some people will say there's externalities and corporations don't exist in a vacuum, and so stakeholders need to be a part of it, right? But some people also say, is it measuring what companies are doing to the earth and society, or what the earth and society is doing to companies? So we're gonna hear some more about that today. It's also interesting to think, is it value increasing, all right? Should companies be doing these to increase shareholder value or stakeholder value of their own accord? Or is it something that regulators are increasingly growing fond of pushing their agenda into companies? So is it about investor disclosure? Is it about risk mitigation? Is it about corporate benchmarking? It's a little bit of all of those. And again, it's gonna be the role of government and NGOs to figure it out, because the conversation's moving quickly. Right? We heard earlier about the assets being moved into the ESG space. If you just look at Google searches, it's 10x up over the last 3 years. And so people are having this conversation today, and it's increasingly difficult, as was mentioned, to find sort of that purple window between the bipartisan divide that we have. So we're going to be able to talk about that. We're going to talk about the rating agencies, I'm sure, and the differences that they have in their measurement tools and systems and what that means for companies. We're going to talk about what ESG means. And again, I'm here from Washington, D.C. Politics is going to be a major part of this, whether it's the Davos conversation that's happening, whether it's the Department of Labor or the SEC conversations that are happening, or the conversations across 50 states. And you mentioned earlier, Congress is gearing up for a working group on ESG. We're expecting plenty of hearings in Washington, and we're hoping to be able to land these in a way that continue to promote American innovation as it has for more than 200 years. So with that, I'm proud to turn it over to the other panelists.
It's, thank you. This is amazing to see what this has become. I started in this business about 35 years ago, and I started, right around when SRI was really taking off, and that was social responsible investment. And that was where you actually withdrew from. You divested from certain industries that didn't align with certain values. And then over the last few years, people were talking a lot about ESG. It was starting to come up in more and more conversations. And I will say, pretty transparently that I thought that ESG was one of those things that was the most talked about, but people weren't actually ever going to put money there. And that was something I said, within BlackRock walls when we were talking about creating more products that people would have the choice to buy if they wanted to buy something that had an ESG screen as part of it. And now you fast forward, and it is remarkable that we now have trillions of dollars that are investing this way, but also the politicalization and the divisiveness that has been caused by the three letters ESG, which is really, to me, quite remarkable, because as being here as representative of BlackRock, depending upon the day, we have between 8 and 10 trillion of assets. A very small portion of that is in ESG-specific products, but yet we get brought into the conversation because we are the leader in the ESG narrative, and I think we're the leader also, I know we're the leader in terms of the assets that are invested in ESG products. And we get brought into the narrative really for two reasons. One being the fact that we make products available. 90% of our equities that we manage are index funds or ETFs, which are indexes just over the exchange. 10% of our equity assets are actually actively managed, so that 90% of our equity assets are actually managed to a third-party selection of securities. But yet we're brought in as the group that is constantly berated because of our ESG stance. But 90% of our equity assets, which is where you have proxy voting, which is the second part of what we get brought into the mix for, is purely index fund management on the equity side. Then there's the second part of why I think BlackRock specifically gets brought up into this, and why I'm actively engaged in these conversations around the country every day, is on the proxy voting side. And I think there are some that are dissatisfied with the idea that we even make products available that have ESG weightings. It is interesting when you look back at 1992 when the French paper came out that companies that had lower price to book securities actually had a higher expected return over time. That meant that the real big growth companies actually got less money if you invested in those products. And the companies that actually weren't doing well got more. You can imagine that probably wasn't a really well-embraced idea of where you would put your money by the very large growthy companies, because that meant that could actually impact their cost of capital over time. And that's, I think, one of the drivers of ESG as well, of the narrative against ESG. But the proxy voting is the other part that comes up a lot. And what is the role of BlackRock? What is the role of Vanguard? What is the role of State Street? When you add those three companies up, we roughly, probably combined own roughly 20% of a lot of the outstanding shares of the publicly traded equity companies. And what's our role in proxy voting? And are we using ESG screens to dictate liberal beliefs throughout the corporate boardroom? And obviously that is 100% not true. We have one purpose and one purpose only, which is to increase the risk-adjusted returns for our clients. That's it. And from our perspective, ESG, as you have said and as was said earlier, is purely a risk metric. It's a way of looking at securities valuations and understanding what is the opportunity and what is the risk for securities based on different parameters: employee turnover, employee benefits, risks of oil spills, risks of chemical spills. Like, those are risks that get lumped into ESG, but guess what? We've been looking at those things for 30 years. It's just now packaged as ESG and as creating a lot of heat. So I don't want to talk too long. You're looking at your watch. But I did just want to kind of set the framework that from my perspective, and I would suggest from BlackRock's perspective, our job is to just be capitalists and to earn our clients more money for the different risks and returns that are associated with what happens with publicly traded companies.
I was looking at my watch, so I didn't talk too long. Michael was under the planned time, so just to set that straight. Look, of course, everyone is humans, and of course people running businesses care about the environment, care about the societies they live and operate in. And of course, sober, honest, aligned with shareholder governance is critical. So like the idea, of course, spot on. My critique is, should this be a top-down, a few dozen people defining what's virtuous and what's good, and how it's essentially been implemented? Maybe not Michael's vision of it, but the impact, particularly on my industry, that's what I'm going to speak about, has actually been quite different. Very quick historical sweep. Human life expectancy, as far as we know, about 30 years from before the invention of agriculture, so tens of thousands of years ago, until 200 years ago. We only had a dramatic societal change. David talked a little bit about this. Last 150, 200 years, right? Doubling, more than a doubling of human life expectancy. People living on less than $2 a day went from 90% of the global population to 9%. Like, the world has been transformed in just a few generations. Lots of proximate causes, but the ultimate cause, the ultimate enablers of this, in my view, is two things. The rise of human liberty, bottom-up social organization, not top-down. 200 years ago, even in this country, you needed the majority vote of a government to give you a corporate charter, limited liability to do a business. In England, they changed this with the Registration Act in 1842. United States, it was general incorporation laws. This was enabling bottom-up social organization, not all top-down. And then the rise of coal, then oil, then natural gas, just massively energizing, not just energy, but materials that make everything we're wearing and looking at or sitting on. So these two phenomena just absolutely changed the world. And now I look at my industry and the impact of it on the ESG movement, and it's dominantly a movement against both of these phenomena that created the modern age. For our thing, ESG is really sort of code for greenhouse gas emissions reporting. That is the dominant impact on the oil and gas industry from the ESG movement. And I see my peers writing their reports or giving their things, saying things I know they don't believe, but they're saying them, and they're highlighting their 4% reduction in their Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, which in climate terms means completely irrelevant cubed, as their highest and best use. In our ESG, maybe more of an anti-ESG report called Bettering Human Lives, it's on the tables here. The only number I give in the opening letter is 100 million families get clean cooking fuel, meaning they're no longer burning wood, dung, and agricultural waste indoor. That kills millions of people. They're burning propane in a cook stove. I'm very passionate about this. We want to make the world a better place. A few quick things on social. What has been the role of companies in social impacts? A lot of these you don't hear about. But think about busing in the southern US, right? We think about it as Rosa Parks, a hero of all of us, right? Because she defied the law of sitting in the back of the bus. That was a government law. 30 years before that, most all transportation on buses in the South was private businesses. Small vehicles, little jitneys that moved everyone around. No private business is going to discriminate against a person. The more people that are in those chairs, the more money they make, the more viable their business is, the better life for their kids. The governments in the South had to regulate out of business these private businesses that would never enforce these repulsive discriminatory documents. The only way you get that kind of socially abhorrent behavior is top down and from governments. Businesses just don't play that game. I could give the same story of South Africa, right? One of the biggest drivers of the end of apartheid movement was businesses outside of South African businesses were never going to enforce those rules and be economically inefficient and pay people 5 times more when they can get the same service from someone else. So businesses are not perfect, they're humans, but there's a market mechanism. If they're not delivering a great product, someone else is going to. If they're shamed members of their community, someone else is going to eat their lunch. So businesses have been enormous forces by their nature for social improvements, for increasing in wealth, for energizing the world. And when you have more complex top-down, just the reporting requirements, not just for the reporting agencies, now for the SEC, what this means is it's harder to be in business. That means less new companies, less entrepreneurialism, less competition. Big companies love big government, they love big regulations, but that slows down the dynamism of society. It slows down progress, environmental progress, quality of life progress, human things. So think of what got us here. Do we need a few dozen people on the coast to send us forms so we can fill in numbers, judging people by the color of their skin or their gender, or these one-dimensional skin-deep things? Do we need that definition of virtue to make businesses better or to make businesses do the right thing? Does that make sense?
I'd love to speak to that one point though, because that is what the S gets beat up for all the time in ESG, is that somehow, and I had somebody say this to me recently, is I don't like ESG because I don't want somebody telling my client who has 100 employees that they have to hire a certain number of blacks, Hispanics, women. I don't want that. First of all, like, if you have 100 employees, you're probably not publicly traded, and you probably are not going to have a shareholder proxy come up that is somebody's going to vote on. But we didn't go there. The thing that's interesting about that last point, there were, how many proxies do you think we voted just in the Americas last year?
7,000.
37,000. So when people say they want to vote their own proxies, 37,000 is what you will get. 37,000 proxies, that's if you don't invest globally, which some countries don't have shareholder proxies, like China. So 37,000 shareholder proxies that we voted on last year. How many do you think out of those 37,000 actually required or were proposals to do racial or gender audits?
37.
14. So it sounds like a big deal, but it's 14 out of 37,000. How many do you think we voted on positively? How many do you think we voted to actually have a third party come in and look at policies and procedures for discrimination across gender or race? How many do you think we voted for?
3.
6. We voted for 6, less than half. Why did we vote for those 6? Did anybody want to take a guess what the top 10 gender or racial discrimination settlements were? For just the top 10, not all, which there's a lot, just the top 10. How much do you think that amounted to last year? Over $600 million. One company, I won't mention its name since we're being filmed and there's press in the room, but one company, which we use every day on our phones, had one settlement. I won't tell you what you use it for, but we all use it. Had one settlement last year for $310 million. So when we, as a company who engages with companies, who have a responsibility as a fiduciary to our clients to try to maximize returns for our clients, when we look at a company that has had a $300 million settlement and a shareholder submits a proposal to vote on whether there should be an observation, a survey, an analysis of whether there's been any kind of improvements in policies and procedures, we're going to vote yes for that. We're going to vote that yes, there should be some oversight of that because we don't want our clients to lose another $310 million in that case. That's not telling companies how to do their business. That's not signaling virtuosity. That's just being a good fiduciary to clients. And if we had 7,000 proxy votes that we had to look at for this, this issue, well, it would be hard to do because there's only 3,800 publicly traded companies in America, but let's say there are 3,800 of them. We probably would vote for a percentage, small, less than half, trust me, because what we're looking for is where there's risk and where there has been proven risk, where they have had really bad behavior. And we want to look at those companies and make sure that they've improved so we don't have shareholders take the brunt of bad behavior. I don't think that's signaling virtuosity. I think that's being a good fiduciary.
Well, Chris, you laid out a framework of some of the discussions that are going on the coast is different than the implementation side of it. Is there an implementation side that you think would work, that would be pro-innovation and help small businesses achieve their goals?
No, not as structured today. Should investors, with their own money that are managing their own things, vote with their heart, vote with their passions? Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not just third-party giant investment companies, but it isn't BlackRock's money, right? They're managing everyone else's money. Most people don't even know BlackRock is managing some of their money. But then there's...
And we're not a bank. People think we're a bank. We're not a bank. We always get lumped in with banks.
State pensions are huge offenders of this. It's basically political action being taken by a small number of people using the force of other people's money. And yes, it has driven society in a direction Michael gives one example where it doesn't sound like it's so terrible. There's only 14 companies where they have a better idea about how to manage gender equity. My frac crews are 99% male, so I don't know how you would track my improvement. Would improvement be if they were 98% male?
Well,
am I discriminating against women because they're dominantly male?
Not if in your industry that there's a high propensity to having males and there's no suits that you've had to settle. Then no, that wouldn't be something we'd even look at.
Yeah. I gotta stir the pot.
No, but it's like, as a fiduciary, that wouldn't be a risk then.
The biggest, and look, the SEC is proposing their disclosure rules are for risk mitigation. People have to disclose their climate risks, right? Because floods have gotten worse and storms have gotten worse, flood damages are rising, hurricane damages are off the tracks, except none of those things is true. None of those things is true. But it is having every company that produces oil and gas, the current proposal is scope 3 emissions. So not just your emissions from producing oil and gas or the third-party electricity or suppliers you use, but the burning of the oil you use that someone halfway around the world may use it for something you don't know. We're in theory going to be reporting all of that. Like, of course, that's just absurd. It's impossible to report all of that, right? And we're doing it nominally to reduce climate risk. How does reporting, or guessing how the oil and gas are consumed around the planet going to reduce climate risk? And let me just summarize the biggest impact of ESG so far, and I'd love to see if Michael disagrees, by far the biggest focus of it has been greenhouse gas emissions. There have been shareholder proxies to make companies comply with the Paris Climate Accords. And aside, the IPCC themselves shows the Paris Climate Accords as a tens of trillion dollars human impoverishment program. But forget that, that's just the people looking at the problem. People on the outside have pushed these things. And what's been the net impact of that, right? It's just raised the cost of capital for people in the oil and gas industry. And what happens when you do that? Capital is more expensive, they invest less of it. We produce less oil and gas, doesn't change the demand at all. So the price of oil and gas goes up. So low-income people spend more of their income on heating their homes, on buying food. Ultimately, more oil and gas production will move to the 85% of oil and gas production that's run by state-controlled countries. The government of Russia doesn't care about your ESG policies, nor does any of the other state-owned oil and gas companies. Like, the impact of it, and presumably the goal of it, is to make energy more expensive, right? And people a little bit poorer. I'm just not sure the climate benefits of that or the risk mitigation of that.
Yeah, and I would suggest I don't think there's anybody other than maybe the oil and gas industry wants the price to be higher. Like, I don't think anybody else wants the price to be higher. I look at it very differently. First of all, I don't think scope 3 emissions, which is what you were talking about earlier, I don't think scope 3 emissions is practical. Nobody should be chasing how somebody else uses their product. I don't think that makes any sense either. So that is what we are looking for, though, is for people to report. I know it's cumbersome and it's onerous to, CEOs.
And what would someone do with that reporting?
Which reporting?
You said you're looking for people to report, presumably scope 1 and scope 2 emissions.
Well, yes.
What are you going to do with that?
Well, with those types of, if you are looking at what the risks are for the things that we're looking for if you were to use an E lens, let's say, we're looking for what's the risk to the company if they had to transition to a lower carbon footprint because of demand for that. It's not that we have an opinion on that, or we're not climate scientists, we're not in that business. What we're looking at is what's the risk. This is what ESG risk metrics look for. What's the risk that if you had if you had two companies, one had a really huge carbon footprint, and another one had a low carbon footprint, and there's all this demand around the world. In the US, it's become very polarized, not so much in most other countries. And there's this huge demand to lower the carbon footprint, which you're doing as well. And every oil and gas guy, I live in Austin, Texas, for God's sakes. Like, hey, I'm surrounded by my friends are oil and gas guys. They're all trying to lower their carbon emission footprint. Like, everybody's doing this. It's the demand of the whole economy worldwide. So there are risks of how much will it cost you to do that for one company versus another. If you're already on a path towards having a lower carbon footprint, well, then it's going to cost you less to get there. If you have no clue, if you're not putting any money towards reducing your carbon footprint, your methane, you're not capping old wells, you're not doing things like that, well, that's going to end up costing you more over time. That's another risk that we look at when we're evaluating companies to make sure that we price that in. No different than your comment about hurricanes and floods and property damage isn't increasing. Okay, you know, different reports will say different things. Not the hurricanes and stuff, I'm not going to argue with that, but property damage, you know, as people have more expensive homes in certain parts of Florida, there's more property damage.
But as a percent of economy, it's shrinking, right?
It may be shrinking, but
maybe.
But what I'm saying is, what do we look for? We're not going to say whether it is or isn't, but what we're going to do is, let's say we have 2 insurance companies that we're looking at. We want them to disclose to us their exposure to areas that are more hurricane prone, fire prone, things like that. If you have 2 insurance companies that have the exact same business, exact same revenues, everything's exactly the same, but one has more risk, and I'm not going to debate whether or not there's more or less property damage, more or less hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, fires, but if you have 2 insurance companies and they report the data to you and one has more liability risk in areas that are prone to climate events, don't you think we should know that as a fiduciary to make a decision between how much we invest in those 2 companies? I personally want to make sure I'm investing more in the company that has less liabilities. So if a Florida hurricane comes through, we don't have $1 billion worth of liability that we didn't price into the model for which companies we're buying. All we're asking for and what we vote for is disclosure of those types of that type of information so that we can make better investment decisions. And again, the only thing, and I'll definitely give you this, the only thing that's different from the last 30 years to maybe more so in the last few years is the public demand and the total global move to wanting to reduce carbon emissions. So we're looking for more disclosure information on carbon so that we can understand who has a huge footprint, who has a small footprint, and what's the risks for that company to move to a lower footprint. And so that's what we're looking for, is the information. We're not dictating to CEOs. You know how to run your business better than we do. But what we are going to dictate is please give me the information when we get a chance to vote for that so we can make better decisions as investors.
So there's critics that say, not just on the disclosure side, but on the rating side, it's confusing, it's not correlated. If you went to your hypothetical insurance companies and said, what's your risk rating of hurricanes here, they'd be pretty correlated.
Yeah.
If you went to bond rating agencies, they'd be pretty correlated. But even in the ESG space, some of the agencies look at it as a A to F scale or a 1 to 100 scale, with 100 being high, or some look at it as 100 being low. So is that really creating the information that investors need to make decisions, or is it more noise and signal?
So there's where it gets into the 2 different issues. So one is products that use a third-party ranking of your ESG score. And so products are developed based on MSCI or S&P, who will grade a company based on their environmental, social, or governance attributes, characteristics. And they'll grade those. And then there are products that are created that will rank the securities they buy based on their score. And so people who will want to buy an ESG product will want a product that, and this is what some people don't realize, is the securities in an ESG product and the securities, let's say ESG, for an example, it's a total US market ESG product. And if you look at ITOT, which is a total market ETF that has every security in the US equity market, if you look at those 2 products, they basically own exactly the same securities in different weights. It's not like ESG is eliminating securities. Now, there are groups, there are certain institutions that will say, I don't want any fossil fuels in my portfolio. Great. That's an investment mandate from a client, we'll manage that. But we make those ESG products available so people who want to have maybe a different way of scoring and ranking the same exact securities that are in that portfolio, those products are made available. No different than we make like BlackRock. We have, in fact, we own 2%. 2% of the portfolio of IEZ is Liberty Energy. And that is a pure energy equipment and services fund that we make available. So you can buy that, and 2% of that goes directly into Liberty Energy. So we make these all available, whether you want, a pure oil and gas, IYE, you want services and equipment, you want IEZ, we make those. If you want ESG products, we make those. So So there's that ranking that I think gets a lot of people riled up because it changes the order. It's the same securities in these portfolios, but they're ranked differently. The problem I have, I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but the problem I have is that there isn't a standardization of that.
Right.
The thing that I would like to see improved, and I think you would as well, is different industries will have the 3 E, S, and G weighted differently. And that creates, I think, a natural disjoint for certain industries that I don't think is fair. So I would like that to improve.
Well, I can give an example of that. So if you're in the oil and gas business, your ESG score is like 35% is just greenhouse gas emissions. Over a third is one thing.
Yeah, 50%, depending upon whether you're oil and gas or services, it's 50 or 45% is E.
And E is dominated by climate change. Like, I'm a long time and board member of an environmental group. Clean air, clean water, particulate matter emissions themselves kill 5 million people every year. Like, this is, by any economics or public health status, just massively more important than these incremental changes in greenhouse gas emissions. To me, it's all about priorities. You know, when climate is prioritized as by far #1 across the E, that's where the effort's going to be.
Yeah.
And clean water, clean air, energy access, people not starving in their homes or able to heat their homes to a higher temperature. Let me give one example, right? The biggest embracer of this has been the United Kingdom. Largest reduction in greenhouse gas emissions on a percentage basis. US is by far the largest on a gross basis, driven by growth in natural gas too, which are companies that get big negative marks today for being in that business.
But now it's considered green in Europe. So natural gas is considered a green fuel in Europe.
But it was green, then it wasn't green, then it is green. Like, is this?
It is now.
Does this help? Does this help business? Yes. Look, we all, I think everybody up here cares about the environment. We care our societies. We care about honest governance. But the question is there a standardized reporting metric that's going to do this? Facebook is by far and away the consumer of energy in the United States, by far #1. Their E score is like 2%. Them using energy, that doesn't problem. It's green. It's for people to look at pictures of their friends. But these people that are using energy to help someone get to work, that's a negative. These are just very complicated things. Trying to have a top-down view and these rankings. And then, as you said, well, they still own the more stocks, but we own more of the ones that get a high E score and less of the ones. I mean, we can split hairs, but the net impact has been less money into oil, gas, and coal. Well, of course, everyone can demonize coal, not me. Coal's the largest source of electricity in the world by far. We have 1 billion people without electricity, another 1 billion people with only a few hours a day. We need more coal. That's what, in poor remote Africa or South Asia, it's either no electricity or coal-powered electricity. I'm all in on coal. Oh no, not an ESG fund. We got to get all the money out of coal. Well, what's the impact of that today? Coal prices are higher today than they've ever been. We can just wish them away. We can just say they're bad. We can pull away capital from them. What does that get? Less coal production, not less coal demand, not less coal need. It just means higher prices. It just means higher prices.
But I'm curious.
Is that a good thing?
Well, no, but I'm curious on that. So coal was trading at $40 a metric ton prior to the pandemic. And so that was sort of a price, it ranged between $40 and $90 a metric ton was what coal traded for. Then you go through the pandemic and oil, gas, coal, everything early in the pandemic traded at negative. Because everybody thought there was going to be any demand, so we had too much supply, you had to pay people to store it for you now. So then we went through that period. And then I hear this all the time, ESG is the reason why energy prices are high. I'm like, oh, interesting. And now if you look at the charts on energy prices, what spiked energy prices? Coal went to $450 a metric ton. Natural gas went to almost $10 an ounce. Oil went to $150. They all went the same day. They all spiked around the same time. Anybody got a guess? Russia invaded Ukraine. So that's when it all spiked at the same time. That would have been your guess.
No, that's the wrong guess.
But that is when things actually spiked. You look at it's all around that same time. Now it's all settled back in. Coal's back down to $136. Natural gas is $2.12. You got oil back in the 70 to 80. So like it's all settled back in. But the thing that I hear a lot of times is people will say, well, ESG is the reason energy prices are higher. And I'm always like, well, that's interesting. And ESG is the reason why banks won't finance oil and gas. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Does anybody know what the returns were for technology, which is what gets most of the money in any portfolio these days, including ESG portfolios, S&P, everything is technology laden. The returns for technology from 2010 to 2020 was over 400%. What was the returns for the traditional energy sources, traditional energy, oil and gas? What were the returns during that same 10-year period? 37%. So if you're a bank, if you're an investor, you would put your money where you have the highest expected return. I'm not critical. I think we need oil and gas, and I think we need fossil fuels for the reasons you've said for a long time. We need to help people in countries that can't afford it. Like people that burn wood and dung typically do it because it's free. It's a free commodity for them. But we have to find ways to like improve things. And I'm 100% agreeing with what Chris says in terms of fossil fuels are a very important component of growth, economic growth, personal growth. Those things are all super important, but ESG isn't the reason that these things lost funding and things like that. It was the performance was really bad for a long period of time. Now we've had a great period of 2 years where the prices have done very, very well, and you're seeing lots of money coming into this sector. We're seeing it in both products that we serve. We see it in private equity money that's looking for infrastructure as well as drilling projects. So it's like money follows where there's opportunity. I don't think ESG is the reason that the price is changing.
So
that's my opinion.
Let me come back on that.
Yep.
And of course, money follows 100%. Of course, there's multiple factors in this.
Yes.
It's not just ESG, just ESG.
No.
But at the margin, there's no question it has an impact. And you mentioned from 2010 to 2020, technology wildly outperformed energy. Why? Right? Because the shale revolution arrived. We flooded the world with supply, and prices collapsed. Saved the consumers of the world $1 to $2 trillion a year, but rough on our industry. Last year, technology was down 30%, energy was up 50%. So it changes, but the ESG scores of energy didn't. I still have banks pulling out of our credit group today. Very low debt, very low credit risk. ESG is not the everything, but it happens to be the topic we're talking about tonight. And on the margin, does it lower equity capital, debt capital, private endowment money going to energy? 100%. Is it everything? Of course not.
No.
And let's talk about natural gas. Natural gas to me is arguing with coal is the most important fuel. And the reason is natural gas is used to synthesize nitrogen fertilizer. If we just banned this one use of this one hydrocarbon, global food production would be cut in half, right? It's the surest way to kill a couple billion people in the next year or two, is to ban one product.
What is it, like 2/3 of fertilizer is, I don't know what the right word is built, designed, created, formed in Russia and China. So it's like fertilizer is massive in those two countries.
They're huge producers of it, but so is the U.S., so is everywhere.
US is
But the problem with, there's this belief that all the problems with energy are Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I think that's exactly backwards. If you look at natural gas prices, they tripled 5 months before Putin invaded Ukraine. It was not some great foresight, they knew the tanks were going in. It was simply the global demand for natural gas exceeded the entire global ability to compress and ship natural gas. Why? Natural gas is the fastest growing energy source by far, way bigger than wind or energy. Not in a percentage terms, but on incremental energy supplied to the world. There should be a market mechanism responding to that. And there was. We built LNG export capacity in the United States, but slower than we would have otherwise if it hadn't been so expensive to finance them, in meaningful part because of ESG pressures. So supply crossed demand in September of 2021. At that time, United Kingdom had 2 fertilizer factories. They shut them both down. Europe shut 70% of its fertilizer production capacity down. Dry mouth.
Thought you were falling for a second. I was going to grab you.
But in any case, so the crisis, the energy crisis that's significant that we are still in, it started before Russia invaded Ukraine. In fact, Putin's wanted to invade Ukraine for 22 years. He went in 2014 because oil and gas prices were very high. And then the catalyst, it isn't the cause of him, But the timing of it going in was because there was a critical global shortage of natural gas. But Putin did not cause that spike. He responded to it.
Do you look at it? Yeah, there's several that did there. Do you look at ESG and the performance of traditional energy as like a chicken and egg? Like which came first? Was it the poor performance? And again, I'm a buyer. I own IYE, so like I'll be clear. I own the ETF that buys traditional energy sources. So I will fully disclose that. I also buy iClean, which is the clean energy one too. So I'm hedging my bets. And that's what I suggest a lot of people do. But that it's like a chicken and egg. There's this debate around one causing the other, and it's like, if you just look year after year after year during the 2010s, it was like the worst performing sector year after year. And I always feel, and again, it's not because I'm like super like pro ESG. I'm like a realist of like an economist of looking at it saying, one causes another. And if you look at it from a perspective of like, if you have terrible performance year after year, there's going to be less investment. Or are you suggesting the less investment is what causes the bad performance?
No.
Okay.
It's both factors. Look, ESG, I think ESG movement, this is my personal belief, ESG movement really took off after the financial crisis. Everybody in the financial world, Michael and the lending banks, they were all evil because they destroyed the world, right? So they got to burnish their reputation coming out, and this huge emphasis on ESG. Well, there was a financial, I don't blame the banks or financial companies for that. I'm just saying that's the perception in the world, but we're going to save the planet from catastrophe by redoing the energy system. We're going to be in sort of the vanguard as this issue rose. That drove the ESG movement. The shale revolution is happening at the same time. Great for 99% of humanity, bad for the 1% that are in the oil and gas business, because overinvestment, oversupply. So ESG rises and goes for 8 or 10 years where they could say, well, we're doing good, we're saving the planet, and we're making you more money, because virtuous companies are better businesses. This was dominated because technology did great during that decade, energy did horrible during that decade. Last year, the amount of money going into ESG funds has peaked and actually declining now because of this performance thing. ESG funds that didn't invest in energy underperformed all the indexes last year because energy had by far outperformed everything in the last couple of years. So look, it's the quality of a business is the dominant driver of these things. I mean, I'm not out of business. And as they say, ESG movement's actually been good for our industry, right? Because you're incrementally reducing the supply of something. Our profitability is record. I always say, I wish they weren't record profitability right now. Because they're record because we have structural undersupply. This is not good for society. It's great for my business. But it's dominantly the business factors. ESG is just this impact at the margin. But I think the dialogue is that impact at the margin good? Is it making corporations behave better and do better things? My argument is it's not. Corporations do that anyway. You got to get customers, you got to get employees, you got to get communities. If we're not good citizens, it's bad for business. I don't need somebody from New York telling me, how to be good and how not to be good. That's how business works. But on the margin, it's moving money out of some industries that are socially out of favor. And at the margin, it doesn't take much. A little shortage of energy is a crisis.
Right,
it's just a margin impact. But I think the only summary of ESG impact for me so far has been on the margin, pretty negative.
What about as a global competitiveness issue, right? We've seen supply chains be reshuffled throughout COVID and beyond. We're now as a nation trying to reshore some of the chip manufacturing that has migrated to Asia. You think about the corporate citizens that we have here, I think are the best corporate citizens in the world. But if there's a marginal cost to doing business here that doesn't exist in other places, for somebody like Russia's Gazprom or China's Sinopec or Saudi Aramco or some of the other folks out there who don't operate with the same sort of standards we do, is it actually having a negative effect on promoting American corporate values that has a worldwide impact?
I think that if you had companies voting for cuts in production in one country and not in another, that then there would be a challenge, a problem with that. So if you had, there are lots of shareholder proxies that come up about, reducing emissions, reducing production. And we didn't vote for a single one of those last year. And the reason we didn't vote for a single one of those cuts in production is because the world needs more reliable energy. So we're not going to vote for something that is going to dramatically improve and increase inflation, which is what would happen if we continue to cut traditional energy. So like we have to find an equilibrium in that. And that's what you and I are both agreeing to, is there's an equilibrium price, profit, and production. Like we have to find that equilibrium. And I think that one of the biggest misnomers that people will suggest is that there's this big energy transition that's going to take place, in the next few years. And I always say it's not really much of an energy transition. It's more of an emissions transition that I think people are trying to move towards, including everyone in your business. I mean, I read your report. I admire some of the work that you're doing, trying to actually create plants that power your equipment, right at the source, so you're not shipping back and forth and wasting energy doing that. Like those are the things that everyone is in our, mutual industries are all working towards. But yet, to answer your question, if firms with reasonable shareholder proxies of other people's monies that they were voting for ideological or political purposes, like that would be a problem. And that's what I would suggest is not happening, particularly when you look at the voting record of, at least I know my company, which is not voting for cuts of production.
Can I ask a question?
I don't know.
Okay, yeah, exactly.
She runs the show.
Okay. We'll have a reception to follow, right?
Yeah, you can ask the reception.
Exactly. We mentioned misnomers, and I think part of the debate, the polarization is that people have different definitions of ESG, and people sort of think about touching the elephant in different parts. So can you help us dispel some of those misnomers or mischaracterizations of the industry?
I'll let you go first.
No, you're the expert. I'm just seeing the impact on my industry. You're at an investment house that's been at the forefront of this. So I think you've got more knowledge there than me. I think it's better if you go first.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the challenges is, and we're reading it, and one of the things that I find quite disheartening is when people make claims about something, and it's quite frankly, like I run a business that is responsible for helping financial advisors build better portfolios in my intro. I'm not like our ESG czar that goes around and speaks about ESG, but because of living in Texas and because of being part of this whole movement that started in Austin and outside of Austin, primarily in Austin, and others have jumped in, many. The thing that I actually am spending and dedicating my time, and the reason I'm here today, is I just actually enjoy. I love people like Chris that we get a chance to actually have a conversation, and it's not hostile, and it's not, where nobody's throwing paint, and nobody's, I've got two extremes. I got people throwing coal in my escalators and, and paint in my offices in Europe, and then you've got the other side, which is, accusing us of like trying to be anti-democratic. And it's like, it's very strange to me that ESG has become that somebody said to me the other day, why didn't, I won't mention the name of the company, but why did they pull out of ESG and you haven't? And I'm like, what do you mean pull out of ESG? Like, is it like something you can pull out of? There's so much misinformation about what ESG is. And in reality, like in its truest form, yes, it has implications for different industries, absolutely. But in its truest form, it is a measurement. It is a series of information that helps make judgments and decisions on risks that companies have. No different than things looking at fundamentals and price to earnings and other things that we look at when we look at, we evaluate companies and likelihood that a product's going to be successful or not successful. Like they're all just opportunity and risks that we're looking at. And somehow, it has become such a political baton that it's hard for me to even fathom. It's hard for me to fathom somebody saying, we don't want you using any ESG metrics in the management of our pension dollars. And what the example I gave earlier of like, so you don't want us to take into consideration like hundreds of millions of losses because of, lawsuits and things like that of a company? You don't want us to take into consideration that like, there could be massive governance issues that like huge risks within companies. Like it's really, the thing that I don't think people understand is you can't really unbundle what has now been defined as ESG from achieving and searching for the best returns. Like they all kind of go together. Like if the 10% of our actively managed portfolios, what we're looking at is what's the anticipated return of any company that we look at and that we engage with. And all we're trying to do is maximize that. And so somehow there's this theory, though, that ESG is something other than just a series of risk metrics that we're using to make better decisions about where to invest clients' money. By the way, we don't take discretion for those monies. They make the decision. Financial advisors, institutions, and consumers decide where they're going to put their money. We just make 600 options available and slice and dice publicly traded securities a million different ways for them to vote with, you said priorities, I'd say preferences, which are similar words, but their own personal preferences. They make their decisions the way they want. We just provide choice. But somehow, by being a provider of choice, we become a bad guy, and I don't understand how that's linked.
Yeah, I think exercising your own choice. The complaint, of course, is that you're exercising the choice of 100 million Americans that are not part of that choice. So
which is why we're trying to give it away. That's why we created voter choice, so that if people think that's what we're trying to do, we're give the vote away. Let people vote the 37,000 proxies.
But they generally don't own stock in every business in America like you guys. You're a little bigger than the average farmer in Iowa.
No.
Okay.
The average farmer in Iowa who owns a diversified portfolio owns thousands of companies in their portfolio. If they own an ETF like ITOT, they own thousands of securities. Sorry. So yes, you'd be surprised. Even the farmer in Iowa does own actually thousands of securities.
Well, I think it's interesting, the perspective, because coming from Washington, D.C., which some people describe as 68 square miles surrounded by reality, I think part of the issue is it feels anti-democratic, right? And I know that you and your board and Mr. Fink and others are trying to get the voice of the people back into those proxies. But it also feels like what Chris described earlier as people on the coast or people in Brussels sort of top down saying, this is how we should behave in a way that is new for people. And so I've experienced this in Washington, and now that debate's moved to the SEC and to the state capitals that were mentioned earlier. And so I think it's not just an ESG discussion, it's a true discussion about the role of corporations in public life. It's a role of individuals in an international economy that people are struggling with. And I think it's not just in ESG, but you see it more broadly in voting patterns across the country. So we are going to have a chance to wrap up with some final remarks. It's been fascinating, and I look forward to hearing how we conclude.
I'll go, I probably haven't communicated very well, and it's a tough topic. And again, what we're trying to discuss is this institution, not differences, personal differences between Michael and I, but just this institution and its impacts. But let me just tell a quick story that hits this thing home for me. So an individual running a giant global financial institution, I'm going to leave all names out of this, wrote a letter 3 years ago about the changing world and the changing investment landscape. And 80% of this letter is about climate change and that the world is changing, things will be uninsurable, all business has to change, the energy transition system has to change, every business has to be viewed through this lens. Like, oh my God, this is the kind of message kids in schools get, which is why 20% of children report nightmares about climate change. When you message something and you have a big podium, people listen. So a little bit after this, another giant financial institution that has a lending arm that's in my credit facility sends a letter. I got a generic letter, but it went to everyone they lent money to and said, we are going to align our business practices with the Paris Climate Accords, and we're going to begin with the energy and transportation sectors. Your representative will reach out to you to talk about it. I dashed off an immediate response saying, I want to see your economic analysis. Clearly, it's dramatically different than the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's economic analysis, which shows the Paris Climate Accord is just a monstrous $50 to $100 trillion human impoverishment program. Clearly, you guys have done something different. I got on the phone with the vice chairman of the bank, their head of climate, their head of energy, and our representative. And he said right away, their climate guy said, no, we didn't do any such analysis. In fact, their climate guy said, I don't know nearly as much about climate change as you do, but we had a proxy battle, which we won, that was going to force us to, but we won with only 50-some% of the vote. It was very close, and I'm not going to mention how others may have voted on this. It was very close, and we're taking proactive action to forestall this being imposed upon us. And I said, I appreciate that understanding of why you did that, but think of the message everyone on the whole planet just got. The most sophisticated financial institution in the world is going to change their business practices because of climate change. Not poverty, not malnutrition, not gender inequality, not war, not energy security, none of these other issues. The biggest issue for our business is climate change. Oh, no, we don't believe that at all. I said, but that's what everyone just heard. When you act that way, when you speak that this issue trumps everything else, what else would people read into that?
I think I know who you're talking about. Might know him well. Yeah, I hear you. You know, it's interesting. Views, opinions, securities prices change every day based on new information that comes into markets. Like, if you ever wanted to know why securities prices change, new information is going to come in today, and the price will change tomorrow. Like, prices change based on new information. And I think what was being referenced in a letter that was marked about is to set, and yes, it does set wheels in motion. And some of those are positive, and some of those are challenging. But the gist of the remarks on things like that are be prepared, and what was also said in that is it is the greatest opportunity for wealth creation in a long time for the fact that this entire wave around the world is moving to an awareness of climate change and the impacts of climate change. And so new businesses, new innovations, there's going to be all this new opportunity to invest. And that was basically the gist of what was being said was, if you know, there is going to be opportunity. I love something you say, Chris, where you talk about, you know, this isn't that we're going to create alternative energies to, you know, fossil fuels for a long time. We're going to create additional sources of energy because we have increasing demand, and we're going to need additional sources of energy. It's going to be a long time before one replaces completely anything in the traditional fuels. But it is a remarkable impact of what happened when that letter was written, of how much money is being invested in researching new forms of energy beyond wind and solar, but other things, whether hydrogen has a chance or not, we'll see. But you know, there's other forms of energy. Fusion, I know you're very much a supporter of. Those are things that need money to invest, so to innovate. And I think that's really what the gist of that was, is like stimulating people to step up and say, I want to be part of where we're going, and I want to invest in those innovative ideas, and that is actually going to be a big moneymaker for me over time. And you look at what's happening, there's so much information in securities prices. You look at I probably can't say the name of it, but a company that is in the renewable space, it's trading at 100 times earnings right now. That's because people have such a high expectation of the growth of that area of that business. And that's really what I think, and I believe, and I know that we're making a statement about, which is like, come with us on, like, don't leave behind everything that we need in order to flourish, but there's going to be incredible opportunities for growth over the next 100 years in additional forms of energy. And that's what I believe will be an unbelievable opportunity for both growth of the world, but growth for people's financial stakes in their portfolios over time as well.
Well, thank you. It's been an unbelievable opportunity today to listen to the energy on stage. And I think the Business Roundtable has been leading this discussion. So important for all of you to be here, because this is how these conversations need to play out over the next 100 years for innovative competitiveness. It was Einstein once said, you can't solve problems at the same level of thinking at which they were created. And so it's the kind of thinking that you have today that I think is going to be able to propel us to another great century and more. So thank you for your time today, and thank you for being here. Thank you. Good stuff, glad.
Let's turn our mics on.
Last one. One more. That's all right. Hi, my name's Chris Schmidt. I'm the managing partner of Deloitte and also the chairman of the Cobert board. Thanks, guys. It was great. One more time. I will say that was incredibly entertaining. I will also say that there's a VIP reception at my house at 5:30, so if anybody didn't get tickets, we still have some available. Aaron is in the back there. I was going to serve wine. I think there might be the addition of hard alcohol now after that. But genuinely, it was a great conversation. I think if we rebranded it again, it might be a capital E that's bold. We might do another one with S and G, prominently displayed more, but it was a fabulous conversation. I think this is the example of why myself and others are involved in COBIRD, is to have a dialogue like this where people can actually have some civil discord and have a conversation and it doesn't get ugly. So exciting event. Who are the other board members on COBIRD that are here? If you stand up, raise your hand. Stand up, come on. Thank you all. They all support the organization with their time, their money from their companies, and we, in my belief, do some great things. So with that, we'll break. And again, I thank all three of you for being here. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for coming.